Let's look at composite functions. Composite functions are functions inside of functions. And our main rule is we're going to start with the most inside function and work our way outside. That's what you see here in example 1, f of g of 9. We're not multiplying here. It's the g function with a 9 in it. And then whatever answer that is, we're going to plug into the f function. We've got 3 functions listed here that we'll use for all 3 of our examples. You may want to write them down because they will disappear off the screen as we slide along. F of x equals 2x plus 1. G of x is going to equal x divided by 3. And h of x will be the cube root of x. And in our first example, we have f of g of 9. We start with the most inside function, and that's g of 9. So we're going to find out what g of 9 is and not worry about anything else. That's what this line says right here. So we'll plug 9 into the g function. Where there's an x, we'll put in 9, and that's what happens right here in red with the blue 9. 9 divided by 3 is 3. When you plug 9 in for x in the g function, you get 3 for a result. Well, we can now substitute that in for g of 9. Where this used to say g of 9, right here, we'll put in a 3. And now we have to find f of 3. So we'll switch gears and go over to the f function, which is 2x plus 1. Where there was an x, we'll put in our 3. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. That's what f of g of 9 is, 7. In our next example, we'll use the same functions, h of f of negative 14. The most inside function is f of negative 14. So we'll find out what that is. And again, that's up here, f of x equals 2x plus 1. So, 2x plus 1. But we know what x is going to be, negative 14. 2 times negative 14 is negative 28, plus 1 is negative 27. That's what f of negative 14 is. So we'll substitute that in where there used to be an f of negative 14. This whole thing turns into negative 27. You see it here and here. And our h function is the cube root of x. Our x value is negative 27. So we're searching for the cube root of negative 27. That's negative 3. That's what h of f of negative 14 is. Negative 3. Start with the inside function and work your way out. Our next example might look a little confusing, but we follow the same steps. G of 108. We'll start with the most inside function, which is g of 108, and we'll find out what that is. We'll go to the g function. It's x divided by 3, so we'll plug in 108 for x. So g of 108 is 108 divided by 3, which is 36. So we can substitute 36 in for g of 108. So we used to have g of 108 right here. You see it there in red and blue. But we're going to take that out and switch in 36 because we know that's what g of 108 is. Now we find g of 36. It just so happens we're going to visit the g function again. We just follow our directions. If this would have said h or f, we would have gone to the other functions. But it says g, so we'll go back up to g and plug in 36 in for x this time. 36 divided by 3 is 12. That's what g of 108 is. Where things might get a little confusing, but it's still the same steps as here, where there's no real numbers to put in. Find f of g of x. The most inside function is g of x. So we'll find out what g of x is. We don't have any numbers to plug in, so we look up and see that g of x is x over 3. We're just going to stick with that. G of x is x over 3. We'll just leave it like that. We don't have any numbers to put in for x, so g of x is just x over 3. We'll substitute that in now. The f function. We did have a g of x on the inside. We've determined that that's x over 3. So now we'll run the f function, plugging in x over 3 where there was an x. Remember, this just shows where we substitute in our input value. We're going to input x over 3 and stick it in right here. So we have 2x plus 1. Well, we're going to plug in x over 3 in that spot for the input. That's what x represents in these functions as input. So now we get 2x over 3 plus 1. That's what f of g of x is. Now think about this. What happens when x is 9? If x is 9, f of g of 9, we'd plug a 9 in right here and get 2 times 9 is 18 divided by 3, which is 6 plus 1. That's 7. We'll look back at example 1. That's what we got, 7. It took us a couple of steps here, But now that we know what f of g of x is, we can skip in the middle part and just now plug in. If we need to find f of g of 9, we just stick it in here, and it'll take us one step to find the answer. Composite functions, functions inside of functions.